In the heart of Ouagadougou, one of the most unlikely heroes emerged, someone no one would ever expect. A street kid, discarded by society, unknowingly became the man who would save Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, from a plot that could change the course of history. But how did a boy with nothing come to hold the fate of a nation in his hands? Stay tuned to find out, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible, untold stories. President Ibrahim Traoré had been in power for a little over a year. The nation, once thrown into chaos by a military coup, had found some semblance of stability under his rule. Traoré's leadership was bold and ambitious. He had promised to restore dignity and sovereignty to Burkina Faso, aligning himself with Russia and distancing the country from Western influences. His rise was meteoric, his resolve seemingly unshakable. But in the shadows, a storm was brewing. It was a Wednesday morning in Ouagadougou, the capital city, and the streets were as bustling as ever. Life in the city seemed to move in its typical rhythm, despite the underlying tension that simmered beneath the surface. The smell of street food filled the air, with vendors shouting over one another to attract customers, and the hum of motorcycle engines and taxis reverberated through the streets. But in one of the poorest neighborhoods, a boy no older than 16, named Salif, wandered the alleys with a look of quiet determination in his eyes. Salif was a street kid, one of many abandoned by society. Orphaned at a young age, he had learned to survive by his wits. He slept in abandoned buildings, hustled food from markets, and had grown up hardened by the harsh realities of life on the streets. To the people of Ouagadougou, he was nothing more than a faceless figure, one of the invisible, forgotten masses. But Salif had a secret. He was observant, more than anyone could imagine, and he had developed a sixth sense for danger. This was something that would soon make him a key player in a conspiracy no one expected. What no one knew was that, hidden within the network of street kids in Ouagadougou, Salif had a set of ears that heard everything. The boys and girls on the streets, often ignored by the world around them, carried whispers of the city's secrets. For days there had been talk, rumors of a coup, a plot to overthrow President Traoré. It was in hushed conversations between men in dark corners of the market, on street corners, and in the alleyways where Salif had learned the most. The plot was being organized by high-ranking officers in the military, men who believed Traoré had grown too powerful, too independent. Some saw his alliance with Russia as a betrayal of Burkina Faso's traditional alliances, while others simply believed that the time for change had come. They thought they could seize the country's power swiftly, unnoticed, like a snake striking in the night. Salif's first real clue came one evening, as he was picking through the trash in a corner of the city. Two men in military uniforms, faces masked with tension, whispered to each other as they passed by. Salif's ears pricked up at the mention of Traoré's name, followed by the word coup. The conversation was brief but telling. There was a plan to eliminate the president, to use the military's power to take over. The military officers believed that Traoré had overstayed his welcome, that his foreign alliances and bold decisions were too risky. They had to act before he could make any more moves. Salif's heart raced as he processed what started as a normal day in Ouagadougou would soon spiral into a web of intrigue and danger. Salif, a street kid with nothing to lose, unknowingly stumbled upon the plans of a coup that would have taken down President Ibrahim Traoré. But how did he become the one person who could save the leader of an entire nation? Stay tuned as we unravel the story of betrayal, secrecy, and a twist of fate. Salif had always been quick on his feet, using his street smarts to survive the brutal reality of his life. But today, something was different. As he walked through the market, his instincts told him that something was off. A few of the regulars, those he had known for years, were acting strange, furtive glances exchanged, whispers behind hands. Salif had learned to read people, and today he sensed fear in the air. It wasn't just the usual hustle and bustle of the marketplace. There was an undercurrent of tension, something in the atmosphere that hinted at trouble on the horizon, but Salif wasn't sure what. As he passed a small cafe near the corner of the street, he overheard fragments of a conversation that caught his attention. The voices were low, but his sharp hearing picked up on words like military and Traore. Tonight at the barracks, if everything goes according to plan, the president won't even know what hit him, one man said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the street. The coup will be swift. With Traore gone, we'll have control of the country. Salif's heart raced as he froze, pretending to sift through his small bag of coins. He had never been one to eavesdrop, but this was different. The words sent chills down his spine. The President Ibrahim Traoré, the man who had promised to restore Burkina Faso's dignity and power, was at the center of a plot to overthrow him. The coup was happening tonight. His mind raced. A military coup meant chaos, bloodshed, and the end of any hope for change. Salif didn't care much for politics, but he had seen firsthand the struggles of the people of Burkina Faso. The streets were filled with families struggling to survive, the youth with dreams of something better, and the poor who had no hope. If the coup succeeded, everything would be undone. Traoré, despite his faults, was the last line of defense against further chaos. Salif didn't know much about politics, but he knew the streets. And right now, the streets were telling him that something monumental was happening. The coup wasn't just a military operation, it was a fight for control of the nation's soul. He knew he had to act, but how? He was just a street kid, no one important, no one who could change anything. He had no resources, no allies, and no way to get the information out to the right people. But as the conversation between the two men continued, Salif made up his mind. He would find a way. He slipped away from the cafe, his mind already working on a plan. He needed to find someone who would listen, someone who could make sure the coup was stopped before it even began. The military was involved, but Salif knew that there had to be someone on the inside who could stop this. And that's when he thought of an old acquaintance, Almer, a former street kid turned soldier. Almer had joined the army years ago, seeking stability and a way out of the streets. Salif had met him a few times over the years, always exchanging words of encouragement and a shared understanding of their past. Almer had climbed the ranks, and now he was a member of the military, stationed near the presidential palace. If anyone could help him, it was Almer. But how would he get to him without drawing attention? The stakes were too high for any mistakes. As he walked through the streets, Salif felt a growing sense of urgency. He had to act fast. The plan for the coup was already in motion, and if he didn't reach Almer in time, it would be too late. He knew where Almer usually went after his shifts. There was a small, secluded alley behind the marketplace where they used to meet when they were younger. Salif made his way there, his heart pounding in his chest. When he finally saw Almer, it was a strange moment. The man before him was still the same tall, broad-shouldered, and with a familiar glint in his eyes, but the uniform he wore had changed him. Almer had traded his life on the streets for a uniform, and Salif wasn't sure whether to admire him or feel betrayed. But he didn't have time for questions. The country's future was hanging in the balance. "Almer," Salif called, catching the soldier's attention. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." Almer looked around, seeing the wild desperation in Salif's eyes. He nodded and motioned for him to follow. They slipped into the alley where they could speak privately. "What's going on, Salif?" Almer asked, his tone more serious than usual. "Why do you look like you're about to break some bad news?" "I overheard something today," Salif said, his voice shaking. "There's a coup happening tonight. They're going after President Traoré. They're going to take him down, Almer." Almer's expression shifted. He wasn't surprised, but the weight of Salif's words hit him hard. The silence between them grew thick, heavy with the realization that the very future of Burkina Faso was at risk. Salif had come to the right person, but Almer knew the risks involved. If they failed, it wouldn't just be the president who was in danger, it would be the entire nation. "I need you to help me stop it," Salif pleaded. "You're inside the army. You know how to get to the right people. You have to tell them to stop this before it's too late." Almer looked at him, torn. He had never been one to get involved in politics, but his loyalty to Salif and the country ran deep. He couldn't turn his back now. He nodded slowly, his decision made. "I'll do what I can," Almer said, his voice firm. "But you need to stay out of sight, Salif. This is bigger than both of us." Welcome back to Captain Ibrahim Traoré's channel. If you're just joining us, we're in the middle of a gripping, real-life-inspired tale where a street kid's courage might be the only thing that saves an entire nation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating stories of untold bravery and hidden truths. Now, let's return to the story. Salif crouched low beneath the overhang of a crumbling awning, his breath shallow, his pulse pounding with a primal urgency he'd never known before. The night air in Ouagadougou was thick and restless, as if the city itself could sense the coup that was moments from birthing chaos. Streetlights flickered inconsistently, and the occasional shout or revving motorcycle reminded him that life still hummed on, unaware of the avalanche hurtling toward it. Almer had told him to wait in the shadows, to let the soldiers handle the warning. But Salif knew better. The threat was already too far along, too embedded. Almer might try, but the rot was deep, and Salif had seen something else. Moments after Almer disappeared down the alley, sprinting toward the barracks with the fire of urgency in his stride, Salif had circled back toward the cafe. Something had gnawed at his gut, a detail he hadn't paid attention to before. One of the men plotting the coup had worn a distinct pin, small, gold, shaped like an eagle's talon. Salif had seen it before, on an officer who frequented the Grand Mosque on Fridays, a high-ranking general whose name Salif had only overheard once but remembered well, Colonel Doumbia. That name meant something in the city's undercurrent of whispers. It meant ambition, ruthlessness, and now betrayal. The realization hit him like cold water. Almer was going to warn the wrong people. If Doumbia was involved, he could be waiting on the inside, ready to intercept to silence. Salif's blood ran cold. If Almer went to the chain of command, he might be walking into a trap. He had to reroute the message, find a way around the chain to someone even higher, someone the general couldn't touch. But who? As he crept back into the denser part of the market, past vendors packing up their goods, Salif saw him, an old man named Baba Issouf, a retired intelligence agent who now sold worn-out books and dusty radios. Most thought he was senile, but Salif had long suspected otherwise. Baba's eyes had a sharpness too exact to belong to an old fool. The kids on the street whispered about him. He approached cautiously, stepping into the faded glow of Baba's stall. The old man didn't look up, just kept polishing the broken dial of a shortwave receiver. "I need your help," Salif whispered, not caring any more how ridiculous it might sound. Baba finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "You bring trouble, boy," Salif nodded. "A coup, tonight. They're going to kill President Traoré." The words hung between them, the gravity undeniable. Baba stared at him for a moment longer, then slowly reached beneath the table. He pulled out a black leather pouch, flipped it open, and removed an earpiece, a communicator of sorts, outdated but clearly still functional. He adjusted a dial, muttering under his breath in Morse code-like clicks, then looked back at Salif. "Say that again," Baba ordered, his voice low and calm. Salif recounted everything, what he heard, who he saw, what he recognized. The pin, the words, the time, everything. Baba listened, then nodded grimly. "It's not just soldiers," he muttered. "It's foreign. I've been listening to scrambled channels for weeks. French chatter, arms movements. I thought I was going mad. But this." He stopped, adjusting the frequency on his device. "I know someone in the president's personal security, direct line, but they'll need confirmation." Salif's mind raced. "I saw the man. I can describe him. I can show you the alley." Baba hesitated. "If you come with me, you're done being invisible." "He never been invisible," Salif said quietly. People just refuse to see me." That answer seemed to impress the old man. He reached beneath the table again, pulling out a battered revolver, then wrapped it in cloth and shoved it into his satchel. "Come on," he said. "We only have hours, maybe less." They moved quickly, staying in the shadows. Baba led him through a maze of alleys and shortcuts Salif didn't even know existed. They stopped once near a guard outpost, where Baba tapped a rhythm on a metal panel near a garbage chute. Moments later, a small panel slid open from the inside. A man with sharp cheekbones and a sidearm stepped out. "Ratchet," Baba said curtly. "This one has information the president must hear directly. We go to the villa." Ratchet hesitated, eyeing Salif. "He's just don't finish that sentence," Baba warned. "He's not just anything." Ratchet sighed, nodded, and turned. The three of them moved swiftly now, through a hidden access tunnel that bypassed street checkpoints. Time seemed to move in warped cycles, every minute feeling like an hour. Salif's feet ached. His mind was a storm, but he pushed forward. When they reached the presidential villa, they were met by two elite guards. Ratchet flashed a coded emblem, and after a tense exchange, they were escorted inside. Salif, dirty and ragged, walking beneath crystal chandeliers and alongside men in pressed suits with earpieces. It was surreal. They were ushered into a secure room where a man in a tailored gray suit waited. He was the president's chief of security, Commander Ndiaye. His face was tight with concern. Baba spoke first, recounting Salif's story. Ndiaye listened, stone-faced. Then without a word he pressed a hidden switch beneath the desk. A red phone rang. He picked it up. "Activate Falcon Protocol," he said. Now he turned to Salif. "You just gave the president a fighting chance, but now you're a marked boy." Salif blinked. "What do you mean?" "They won't stop, Salif. You saw too much. The men behind this won't rest until you're silenced. From this moment on, you're not a street kid anymore. You're a witness, and you just stepped into the most dangerous game in this country." Salif didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, trying to understand what he'd become. But deep inside, he knew the war for Burkina Faso's future had just begun, and somehow he was in the middle of it. The city didn't sleep that night. It trembled. As the clock crept toward midnight, a different rhythm took hold of Ouagadougou. Gone was the daily hum of market traders and motorcycle engines. In its place was something sharper, low roars of engines that didn't belong on civilian roads, coded radio clicks, and the heavy, muffled movements of armored vehicles inching into position. The coup had begun its final phase. From his position inside the presidential villa, Salif could hear the distant churn of unrest. He sat in a corner of the communications room, eyes wide, nerves taut. The monitors showed feeds from security cameras around the capital, checkpoints quietly being overrun, soldiers standing down or switching sides, silhouettes of military trucks creeping like insects beneath the orange streetlights. It was happening just as he'd overheard, only faster. Commander Ndiaye moved like a phantom across the room, barking orders in clipped tones. "Unit Bravo, hold Sector C4. Do not let the convoy reach the second ring. We intercept at Point Delta. Confirm." The responses came in static bursts. Confirmed. Engaging if provoked. Beside Salif, Baba Issouf remained unnervingly calm, his old eyes fixed on a monitor showing the road from Camp Lamizana, where the rogue officers had rallied their loyalists. It was a straight shot to the palace, a death line. "What happens if they breach that?" Salif asked quietly, pointing at the feed. Baba didn't look at him. "Then this turns from defense to siege, and you better pray President Traoré has a second escape route." Salif's mouth felt dry. Despite everything, he still hadn't seen the president. He was somewhere deeper in the villa, protected by layers of loyal guards and an emergency team. The man whose life he'd scrambled to protect was still a mystery, a figure on posters, a voice on the radio, a distant promise of a better future. The door swung open. Almer stepped in, uniform disheveled, a gash bleeding just above his brow. He looked like he'd been through hell, but his eyes locked on Salif first. "You were right," he said breathlessly. Doumbia made his move, he's leading them personally. They've got air cover and 2 tank units. They're not just trying to scare, they're trying to end this tonight. Ndiaye's face darkened. That confirms it, they're throwing everything in. Suddenly, alarms blared through the control room, a klaxon scream that rattled every surface. The screen showing Sector C4 went dark, then another, then another. Sabotage, someone muttered. Ndiaye grabbed the red phone again. We go to code black. Falcon 1 is green. I repeat, Falcon 1 is green. Evacuate primary. Reinforce the inner perimeter. Prepare for breach. Within seconds, the room transformed into a theater of rapid movement. Technicians pulled drives from machines. Guards loaded heavy rifles, and evacuation protocols unfolded like clockwork. Almer grabbed Salif's shoulder. You're with me. Now. They rushed through the villa's dim corridors, Baba trailing close behind. Every hallway was lined with tension, men with rifles, doors reinforced with steel bars, eyes alert and waiting. Where are we going? Salif asked, panting. To the inner chamber, Almer replied. You wanted to meet the president, you'll get your chance. But first we keep him alive. They turned into a narrower hallway that sloped downward beneath the palace into the command bunker. The air grew cooler, the silence thicker, and there he was. President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a digital map table, surrounded by a handful of advisors. Dressed in dark tactical gear, he radiated the calm of a man who'd stared down death before. When he looked up and saw Salif, his expression didn't change, but his eyes held the gravity of 1,000 battles. You're the boy, he asked, not unkindly, not surprised. Salif nodded, words failing him. Traoré stepped forward. I owe you more than thanks. You gave us the time we needed. Now it's our turn. He turned back to the table. We cut power to the city center, trap their convoy between 2 dead zones. If they break through, we trigger the second protocol. They want to fight. We'll give them one they won't forget. Salif looked at the holographic map, red dots converging on the palace. It looked like a game. But outside, men were dying. Cities were waiting. A nation's soul hung in the balance. Sir, Almer said, we've got an emergency extraction route, but it runs beneath the old tunnels, might not be secure. Traoré considered it. We hold here. The people need to know we didn't run. Suddenly, a deafening boom rocked the room. Dust fell from the ceiling. Lights flickered. They've breached the outer gate, someone shouted. Salif's knees buckled as the ground shook again. This was no longer politics. No longer whispers. This was war. And in its center stood a street kid with dirt under his nails and truth on his tongue. The corridors thundered with footsteps as the assault on the palace escalated. Salif followed closely behind Almer, who barked orders at nearby soldiers, directing them to choke points and fallback lines. Every doorway was manned. Every corner turned into a makeshift bunker. The grand palace of Burkina Faso had become a battlefield. Outside, explosions echoed like drumbeats in the night. Fire bloomed on the horizon. Salif caught a glimpse of it through a narrow window as they passed, armored vehicles burning on Avenue des Forces Armées, tracer rounds streaking the sky like falling stars. The capital was under siege. President Traoré remained calm, a presence of unshakable authority even as the walls around him trembled. He moved with purpose, shifting between secure rooms, checking on troops, giving short, commanding orders. Salif trailed him silently, absorbing every moment. In the chaos, he had become something more than a witness. He was now a thread woven into the story of resistance. Down in the lower levels of the palace, Traoré convened with his inner circle inside a hardened chamber lined with steel and war maps. Almer stood at the door, rifle in hand, nodding at Salif to remain close. Baba Issouf joined moments later, dragging behind him an old satchel packed with encrypted radios and jammers. They're jamming our outer frequencies, he reported. But I rerouted one line through a civilian satellite band. It's risky, but we can reach the loyalists stationed in Fata Ngurma. Traore studied the map. If Fata holds, we can push them back at sunrise. We just need to hold this line through the night. But then came the worst news. They've breached the second perimeter. One of the guards panted, clutching his side, blood seeping through his uniform. There's fighting inside the western wing. The room fell into tense silence. That wing was just 3 corridors away. Traore turned to Almer. We move now. Falcon 2 route. Evac team meets us at the monument tunnel. You boy, he looked at Salif. You stay with me. You earned that right. Salif's throat tightened. Yes, sir. They moved fast. The Falcon 2 path led them through an underground tunnel carved decades ago, an old emergency exit built during revolutionary times, long abandoned and half forgotten. Dust filled the air, cobwebs clinging to rusted metal ladders. Salif slipped once, his knee scraping rock, but he kept going. Behind them, the palace roared with battle. Grenades shook the ground. Gunfire rattled through the earth like a second heartbeat. But the deeper they went, the more insulated the sounds became. At the end of the tunnel, the exit was blocked. A steel gate, warped with age, refused to budge. Traore cursed under his breath. We need that open. We're almost at the monument's base. If we don't move now, we're boxed in. Salif stepped forward. Let me try. With hands calloused by years of scavenging, he felt along the edge of the gate, searching for latches, rusted hinges, loose bolts. His fingers found a release lever wedged beneath a slab of concrete. He pulled once. Nothing. Twice. Then with a grunt, he drove his foot against the slab, dislodging it. The lever clicked. The gate swung open with a shriek. Cool night air rushed in. They emerged behind the National Monument, a marble structure glowing ghost-like beneath the moon. Just ahead, a black SUV idled, lights off. Loyalist soldiers emerged from behind the vehicle, waving them over. But the moment they stepped into the open, headlights flared across the square. A second convoy, not allies, Almer shouted, "Down!" Bullets ripped through the air. One soldier fell. Another scrambled behind the monument's base. Salif dove, his breath knocked out by the impact. Traore grabbed a fallen rifle and returned fire, crouched low. "It's Doumbia's dogs," he growled. Baba Issouf, bleeding from a shoulder graze, rolled next to Salif. "We've got to flank them. The monument has stairs to the upper ring. From there we can cut their line." Salif nodded and crawled after him. The fight stretched into minutes that felt like hours. Gunfire, shouts, blood on white marble. Then a silence. One by one, the rogue soldiers dropped their weapons. Reinforcements from the Fata unit had arrived, cutting off the Coup soldiers from retreat. Colonel Doumbia was nowhere in sight. Almer limped forward, waving a white strip of cloth as a signal. It was over. Traore stood tall in the dawn light, his chest heaving. Smoke curled from the rifle in his hand. Salif rose beside him, trembling. "You did it," the president said. "You didn't just save me. You saved this country." Salif said nothing. But in that moment he knew he was no longer just a street kid. He was history. The sun rose slowly over Ouagadougou, casting gold across a city that had nearly been stolen in the night. The sounds of gunfire had faded into a silence both heavy and holy. Smoke still curled from the scorched edges of buildings near the palace, and the streets bore the scars of armored wheels and hurried boots. But the people, awake now, peering cautiously from windows and alleyways, were not met with foreign flags or the sneers of a new regime. They saw their flag still waving, torn but defiant. President Ibrahim Traoré stood on the monument steps, surrounded by the few who had fought beside him, his black tactical jacket streaked with dust and blood. And beside him, miraculously upright despite the chaos of the night, stood Salif, the street boy who had no army, no title, no voice in any parliament, but who had changed the fate of a nation. By mid-morning, the city was gathering. Word had spread like wildfire, of a failed coup, of traitors caught or in flight, and of a boy, young and forgotten, who had exposed it all. Some whispered his name with awe. Others wept at the thought of what could have been lost. Children pointed. Elders nodded. Soldiers saluted. Inside the palace, as order was slowly restored, President Traoré held a closed briefing with his most trusted commanders. Colonel Doumbia had escaped, barely, vanishing into the northern territories. He would not stay hidden long. Cleanup operations began immediately. The message to all factions within the military and government was simple and brutal. Loyalty was not optional. But amid the political fallout and security measures, Traoré made one decision that would ripple deeper than any decree. He summoned Salif. The boy entered the chamber quietly, still unsure of how to stand, where to place his hands, how to carry the weight of what he had done. Traoré rose to meet him. "Salif," he said, "I've met many men in uniform, many who talk of courage, of duty, of honor. Last night it was you, without a rank, without a rifle, who carried all three." Salif lowered his eyes. "I just didn't want them to win," Traoré smiled, "and because of that they didn't." He turned to his cabinet. Effective immediately, this young man is under the protection of the state. He will be enrolled in the National Leadership Academy. He will have the education, the shelter, and the future that every child in this country deserves but few receive. There were murmurs in the room, nods of agreement, a few looks of disbelief, but none challenged the order. Later that afternoon, in a national broadcast viewed across the continent, President Traoré addressed the people of Burkina Faso. His tone was steady, his voice clear despite the fatigue in his bones. "There are forces in this world that wish to see us divided, colonized not by flag but by fear," he declared. "Last night they made their move, and they failed. They failed because of men and women who stood their ground, and they failed because of a boy with nothing, no family, no title, who chose courage over comfort, truth over silence." He turned, gesturing to Salif, who stood at his side in clean clothes, his eyes wide as the cameras zoomed in. "Let this nation remember his name, not just as a symbol of survival, but as a lesson to all who think the forgotten are powerless." The speech was replayed again and again. Across villages and cities, people gathered to watch. The streets that had once ignored Salif now painted his name on murals. His story became a song, a poem, a legend. But Salif remained the same at heart. He still walked the markets barefoot sometimes, still nodded at the other street kids hiding in alleyways, still slipped extra bread to those with less. The change wasn't in his soul, it was in how the world saw him now, and in how he now saw what was possible. Baba Issouf disappeared not long after, slipping away as quietly as he had arrived. Some said he went north to track Doumbia. Others believed he had been a ghost from the start, called forth only in times of great need. Almer remained in the palace guard but never saluted Salif again. Instead, he greeted him with a clasp on the shoulder and the unspoken respect of two survivors. But now he also understood that the strongest foundations were not built on soldiers, but on those with nothing to lose and the will to act anyway. The story of Salif, the boy who saved a president, would be written into the textbooks of future generations. But to him, it wasn't about heroism. It was about choice. One night, one voice, one chance to do the right thing, and he took it.